Welcome back to Casual Watch Review channel. The thumbnail is not clickbait. I did get hold of one of the new KITH TAG HEUER Formula 1 watches. I am going to go through my first impressions of this watch. I do have it in hand here. If you're just after a real quick soundbite of this watch, you're trying to make a decision and you want to know what it's like. First off, this is too small. It's 35mm and it looks every bit 35mm. I've got a 7.2 inch wrist. It's far too small for me. They've been too faithful to that original version and they've made them too small for what I would say were modern tastes. Is it worth $1,500? Of course it isn't. I'm not going to try and convince you that this watch is worth $1,500 for what the majority of the collection is essentially a plastic quartz watch. You are definitely buying the brand. You're obviously buying the chance of maybe being able to sell it for a little bit more afterwards, which I presume a lot of these are going to be sold to flippers. I got one obviously so I could do a review on here, and also my wife did quite like it. So here's the quick soundbite. No, they're not worth $1,500. This is definitely a purchase that you buy with your heart, not with your head. I would say they are too small for contemporary taste, to be quite honest. Yes, the trend is for smaller watches, but this is a sports watch. This is a watch that looks like it should be bigger, but it isn't. They've gone too faithful to that 35mm. There was a real quick soundbite, but now let's delve in a little bit deeper into my first impressions. Believe it or not, this is the first tag that I've ever owned in my life. When I was a kid, TAG was my childhood brand, and this watch was extremely famous at that time. This is a recreation of the Formula 1 series of watches, and I remember as a kid obsessing about this watch because I think back then they were about £750, so it wasn't totally out of the grasps of being able to own one. It seemed to be a watch, a luxury watch that was affordable. As I learned more about watches and as I really got into them, I never really seriously looked at buying a tag. There are a few that have piqued my interest, but there's so much else going on in the watch world. So how did I end up today owning a tag KITH watch? If you're not sure who KITH are, they are essentially a fashion, lifestyle, streetwear brand. They're like Supreme, although not exactly the same, more upmarket version of Supreme. How I knew about KITH was they have done two previous limited edition G-Shocks that frankly looked awesome. It's just they sold out of them straight away and they were almost impossible to get hold of. They were doing this first before the Bamford one, before all the craziness. KITH was doing these drops of G-Shocks. My favorite is probably the rose gold version they did. It just looks awesome. Even though it's a few years old now, it still, I think, is one of the best G-Shock collabs that was ever done. So when they announced their collaboration last week, and it was during a hodinky talking watches type thing, they came out and said they were re-releasing this Formula 1 because the founder of KITH, Ronnie Fieg, is also a big watch collector, and in particular a big tag watch collector. They announced these last week, and wow, did it generate a lot of column inches, a lot of YouTube videos, and a lot of people's opinions. Releasing them for $1,500, which quite frankly I thought was very excessive for what they were. So they didn't really factor for me. It wasn't something that I was planning on buying. But I went to the local shopping mall. I live in Florida. I went to the Mall of Millennia. I live in Orlando, Florida. I went into Swatch first to ask if they had the new Moonface Snoopy. That's probably the 5th time I've been in. They've not had them. They've been out for quite a while now. Just off the cuff, I was with my wife and I went into TAG and asked, hey, have you seen the KITH one? And I was actually interested to see whether they'd seen one. They came out of the back with 3 versions of this watch, which I was amazed about. So Swatch could take a leaf out of TAG's book here because this watch is going to be popular. Yeah, it's more expensive than the Moon watches, but they at least had some sample versions that you could view before the official release, which is today, May the 6th. And somewhat to my surprise, they told me I could pre-order one, this was on Saturday, pay for it, and then come back on Monday today and collect it. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, I promised myself I would own one of these watches one day, and just as the stars aligned, I now end up owning one. Although the cruel irony here is that probably I will never wear it. My wife very lovingly agreed that she would wear this. She sort of saw in my face when I tried it on, and my heart heart was just sunk when I saw just how small it was. She looked at me and she's like, if you want to get it, I will wear it. Very loving wife. Maybe it'll save her from wearing an Apple Watch every single day. I would say they are too small for contemporary taste, to be quite honest. Yes, the trend is for smaller watches, but this is a sports watch. This is a watch that looks like it should be bigger, but it isn't. They've gone too faithful to that 35mm. Now, one of the other annoying things about the fact that this watch is small is if you do have a smaller wrist, on the plastic version with the rubber strap, they've made the strap too long. My wife actually was all the way towards the end of the strap in terms of the holes, and there was a massive overhang. Now, the strap itself does look like it can be cut down. There's a triangle to indicate that you might be able to cut it down. Probably wouldn't cut it down. So that's why we ended up going with the metal version. A lot of links that can be removed from the metal one. Here you can see it on my wife's wrist. At least it fits. I think the metal one is probably the best value for money. Here you can see I've gone for the sundial one. The bezel, they've kept faithful to that plastic bezel. The bracelet definitely is vintage. We've got a press clasp. It is a lot lighter feeling as well. I'm not going to beat them up too much about that because this is what watches were like at that time. Even Rolexes had very light, probably flimsy feeling bracelets by today's standards. It is beautifully sandblasted. That's a really nice look to it. The box is cardboard box, so you're not getting premium box with this, but it does have KITH on there. I think the best thing about this is the logo. It does have KITH HEUER on the dial, so they've taken TAG out, and I think the KITH and HEUER logo look far better together than TAG and HEUER, which always visually to me have seemed weird because they're slightly different fonts. I think KITH looks more visually appealing, and that's what you're buying this watch for. You're buying it if you're a fan of KITH. I think a majority of people will buy these to collect them instead of buy them to wear them because of that size. Did I think it was worth 1,500? To remind myself of how excited I was back in the 80s when I first saw these watches, probably was worth it. You've seen all the close-up shots here. This is my first impressions. If you want me to do a bit more of an in-depth review of this, maybe I will. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think. I'll see you next time on Casual Watch Reviews.